Breaker or healer chosen one, why you've always felt too intense or too soft. There's something you felt most of your life, even if you didn't have the words for it. Maybe you were told you were too much, too emotional, too quiet, too blunt, too sensitive, too intense. Or maybe it was the opposite. You were told you didn't feel enough, didn't care enough, didn't react the way others expected. In both cases, you felt like you were off somehow, like the world had agreed on a script, but yours was written in a different language. And as much as you tried to blend in, to shrink or stretch yourself to match the expectations, there was always this low hum underneath everything, a feeling that you weren't here to fit in, you were here to change something. This is where it starts. The root of a calling most people don't talk about until it breaks them open. Some of us are born with an energy that doesn't conform to standard frequencies. We are disruptors by nature, or healers, sometimes both at once. You walk into a room and something shifts. Not because you speak loudly, but because your mere presence carries a charge. You felt it. People either gravitate toward you or feel uncomfortable around you. You don't even have to say anything. And you've probably asked yourself, why am I so polarizing when all I want is peace?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
It's because you're not just a person. You're a mirror. You reflect people's truths back to them, sometimes without even realizing it. And the truth can be uncomfortable, especially for those who've spent their lives hiding from it. This is the heaviness of the chosen ones. Whether you were chosen to heal or chosen to break systems that don't serve love, you were never wired for normal. You were never designed to be universally accepted. You were designed to carry a frequency that either heals people or cracks them open so they can be healed. But here's what most don't understand. Being too intense isn't a flaw. It's a fire. And being too soft isn't weakness. It's sacred sensitivity. If you've ever felt like you were constantly flipping between these two poles, it's because your soul is tuned to both. You are both sword and salve. You are meant to cut through illusion, but also soothe the wounds that truth reveals. And that duality can be isolating in a world that prefers people to pick a box and stay in it. Let's be honest, how many times have you questioned yourself? Felt broken because you couldn't turn your mind off, couldn't stop feeling deeply, couldn't stop caring about things that didn't seem to bother others? How many nights have you stayed awake thinking about someone else's pain? How many times have you walked away from a conversation and replayed every moment, wondering if you were too honest or not honest enough? That's not dysfunction. That's divine design. You're wired like that because you're not just living for yourself. You're a vessel. You carry energy meant to shift something in this world. And if you're the type who's always been too much, then maybe you were never meant to live small. Maybe your intensity is the exact medicine someone else is praying for. Maybe your fire is what burns away the lies. Maybe your anger isn't rage, it's righteous. Maybe your passion isn't a problem, it's purpose trying to push through. And if you've always been too soft, maybe your softness is what keeps this world from collapsing. Maybe your empathy is proof that God still speaks through human hearts. Maybe your tears are holy water for dry souls. Maybe your gentleness is what breaks generational cycles of cruelty. But this world doesn't reward that. Not at first. It confuses power with noise. It confuses dominance with leadership. So if you're quiet, you're overlooked. If you're emotional, you're dismissed. If you're intense, you're labeled as unstable. And if you're soft, you're told to toughen up. But the truth is, you were never meant to bend to the world's misunderstanding of worth. You were meant to redefine it. Let me ask you this and sit with it honestly. What if everything you've been criticized for is actually your gift? What if the things you were told to tone down are the exact things that make you dangerous to darkness? What if your sensitivity is a superpower, Your passion a compass, your softness a shield that protects others, and your intensity a torch that leads the way. You see, you didn't just show up in this life randomly. You were placed here in this timeline, in this body, with this exact emotional wiring, on purpose. You were born with a vibration that either soothes or shatters, and the world needs both. Healers are needed to mend what's been broken, and breakers are needed to destroy what should have never existed. You may carry both roles or one more than the other, but either way, it's sacred, it's divine, and it's necessary. So yes, you've always felt different. That's not a mistake. That's the mark of the called, the anointed, the ones who walk through life with a weight that others don't see but somehow feel. And maybe you've spent too long trying to silence that weight, trying to fit in when you were born to stand out. But the moment you stop apologizing for your depth, your softness, or your intensity is the moment you start becoming who you truly are. This isn't just about personal empowerment. This is about collective shift. When a chosen one remembers who they are, they don't just change their life, they change the atmosphere around them. They awaken others. They ripple. And the world starts to heal one soul at a time. That's the real power behind why you've always felt too much or too soft. Because you're not here to keep things comfortable. You're here to keep things true. The hidden role of emotional extremes in spiritual awakening. There's a secret spiritual law that no one tells you when you first start waking up. It's that the extremes you feel aren't flaws to fix, but maps to follow. Those deep emotional valleys and overwhelming peaks, the moments when you feel like you're either too heavy for this world or too light to stay grounded, they're not signs that something is wrong with you. They're signals, invitations, sacred flashes of the divine trying to break through the density of this world. If you've always felt like your emotions were too much, too wild, too unpredictable, too intense, it's because your soul is wired to feel on a different scale. You don't just feel things, you absorb them. You don't just sense energy, you become it. And that capacity, that emotional range, is not a malfunction, it's a manifestation of your spiritual sensitivity. People talk about intuition like it's just a quiet voice in your head. But for chosen ones, especially those walking the path of either the breaker or the healer, intuition speaks through feeling. It's not always gentle. Sometimes it roars. Sometimes it hits like waves crashing over your chest, leaving you breathless, not because you're broken, but because your body is translating energy that hasn't even been spoken yet. You walk into a room and feel what no one is saying. You hear someone's words but sense the pain behind them. You experience joy so pure it makes you cry, and sadness so deep it feels ancient. That's not emotional instability. That's emotional intelligence of the highest order. But most of us were never taught how to hold it, so we learn to suppress it, numb it, judge it, until we forgot that our emotional extremes were sacred indicators of divine movement. Let's talk about anger, because that's one of the most misunderstood emotions along the spiritual path. If you've ever felt like your anger was too much, it's probably because your soul came here to disrupt something. Anger isn't always destructive. Sometimes it's a compass. Righteous anger, the kind that rises from your gut when you witness injustice, manipulation, cruelty, that's not something to suppress. That's a sign. A divine fire. It burns not to destroy people, but to destroy systems, lies and patterns that oppress truth. If you've always had a low tolerance for fake, shallow, manipulative environments, that's not because you're dramatic. That's because your energy doesn't tolerate distortion. You were made to reveal what others hide. And that's a sacred calling. But then there's the other end, deep compassion. The kind that makes you cry over someone else's story, that compels you to help even when you're exhausted, that makes you feel too soft for this hard world. That's not weakness either. That's the healer in you. That's the part of your soul that remembers what it's like to be broken and chooses to offer light anyway. And sometimes that softness is what breaks the hardest people open. It enters spaces that force never could. It heals in silence, and it's just as powerful, just as dangerous to darkness as the breaker's fire. These two extremes, intensity and softness, are not opposites. They are twins. They are the inhale and exhale of the chosen one's spiritual breath. The problem is, we were taught that stability means emotional neutrality. That to be wise is to be calm, detached, always composed. But real awakening doesn't look like that. Real awakening is messy. It's emotional. It swings between ecstasy and despair. Not because you are unstable, but because you're being stretched to hold more divine energy than most people are even aware exists. And that expansion requires emotional range. You can't carry light for others if you haven't first walked through your own darkness. You can't offer real healing unless you've touched the places inside you that once needed it most. So what if your too muchness is actually the exact calibration required to break something open in this world? What if your softness is the balm that heals wounds you'll never see? What if the reason you feel so deeply is because you're carrying not just your own emotions, but ancestral ones, collective ones, karmic ones? What if your tears are cleansing more than your own pain? What if your fire is burning through more than your own frustration? You are not weak for feeling deeply. You are not broken for swinging between extremes. You are not unstable for riding emotional waves that most people can't even see. You are awake. An awakening is not a linear, calm process. It is a sacred unraveling. And here's something even deeper. The emotional extremes are often how the divine gets your attention. The breakdowns. The moments when you feel like you can't take another step. The nights where your heart is so heavy you can't breathe. Or the mornings where you feel such overwhelming gratitude for simply being alive. Those moments are portals. They are the universe shaking you, reminding you that you're not here to coast through life. You're here to transform it from the inside out. And your emotions? They are keys. They are maps. They are the divine's way of speaking directly to your soul, bypassing logic, bypassing conditioning, and going straight to the places where real change happens. So don't run from your extremes. Don't numb them. Don't label them as problems. Learn to read them. Learn to sit with them. Learn to mine them for gold. Because if you do, you'll realize that every time you feel too intense or too soft, it's not a glitch in your system. It's a confirmation. It's God reminding you who you are. A breaker, a healer, a chosen one, not made to be understood by the masses, but made to move them. And the first step to doing that is to stop apologizing for your emotions and start honoring them as sacred tools for your awakening. Why you've always triggered people and attracted the wounded. There's a pattern you've probably noticed, but struggled to make sense of. People either come to you because they feel seen in ways they never have before, or they can't stand being around you for too long. Some open up to you like you're their last safe space, telling you things they've never told anyone. Others get defensive, shut down, or even lash out, and you're left wondering what you did wrong when all you did was show up as you. This isn't a coincidence. This isn't bad luck. This is spiritual resonance. When you're a breaker or a healer, when you're chosen in this way, you carry a frequency that disrupts illusions and awakens truth. And that kind of energy doesn't just blend in quietly. It either heals people or triggers the parts of them they've worked very hard to suppress. People are mirrors. Most live surrounded by reflections that flatter their ego, reinforce their conditioning, and keep their wounds tucked away in the dark. But when they meet you, something different happens. You don't reflect their masks, you reflect their essence. You reflect what's real. And real is often uncomfortable. especially for those who have built their entire identity on performance, denial, or control. Your energy, whether it's your depth, your empathy, your raw honesty, or your unfiltered presence, acts like a spotlight. It doesn't expose people in a cruel way. It simply makes it impossible for them to hide from themselves. And not everyone is ready for that. This is why you've attracted the wounded. Because on a soul level they recognize your light. Not the kind of light that just feels good, but the kind that transforms. The kind that knows how to sit with pain, not reject it. The kind that holds space without judgment. You've probably noticed how people pour their trauma at your feet, how strangers confess things to you within minutes of meeting you. It's not because you invited it with words, it's because your energy feels like safety, like truth, like home. But here's the painful part. Not everyone who seeks your light intends to honor it. Some just want to stand in it long enough to feel warm again before retreating back into their shadows. And some, when they realize they can't control or manipulate you, will turn on you. Not because you hurt them, but because your very existence challenged the lies they've built their lives around. This isn't something you need to fix. This is something you need to understand. Your presence is powerful. And power, when embodied without ego, becomes a mirror so clean it either inspires people to rise or exposes the ways they're still hiding. That's why you've always triggered people. Because you don't play the game. You don't speak in half-truths. You don't pretend to be okay when you're not. You don't tolerate manipulation, hypocrisy, or shallow connection. And that level of integrity, especially when it's unconscious, especially when it's just who you are, feels dangerous to those who've built themselves on false foundations. But here's the deeper truth. You didn't come here to be liked. You came here to be real. You came here to be light. And sometimes light blinds before it illuminates. Sometimes it burns before it heals. That's not your fault. That's your function. You are here to awaken, to disrupt, to hold space, to break cycles. And that kind of soul work doesn't always come wrapped in validation. In fact, it often comes with rejection, with misunderstanding, with being cast as too much or not enough by people who are simply being confronted by their own unhealed parts. So what do you do with this? How do you carry this without becoming bitter or shrinking yourself? You start by remembering this. Not every reaction to your presence is a reflection of your worth. Some are reflections of resistance. And resistance doesn't mean you're wrong, it means you're effective. It means your energy is doing exactly what it's meant to do. The key is to not internalize their discomfort. You're not here to make people feel comfortable, you're here to help them remember who they are. And that remembering often begins with discomfort. You must also know this: just because someone is drawn to your light doesn't mean they're ready to receive it. You are not obligated to save everyone. You are not here to be drained. You are not here to be a dumping ground for those who refuse to do their own work. There's a difference between holding space and holding someone else's responsibility. One heals, the other depletes. And as a chosen one, part of your growth is learning the sacred art of discernment. Who is truly ready to heal and who just wants to feed off your energy without changing? Who honors your presence and who only seeks it because they can't face their own shadows? This is where your power sharpens. When you stop trying to be palatable and start standing fully in your truth, even if it triggers, even if it disrupts, even if it means walking alone, because your presence, when fully owned, becomes medicine. But it's not your job to force anyone to drink. You offer the cup, you become the invitation, but they must choose their own healing. Let me ask you something that might shift everything. What if the people you've triggered the most are the very ones whose lives you've impacted the deepest just by being yourself? What if the discomfort you've caused wasn't rejection, but a sacred disruption designed to wake them up? And what if your role in their awakening isn't to walk with them forever, but simply to be the tornado that clears the path? You are not here to be digestible. You are here to be transformational, and transformation is rarely tidy. It's raw. It's emotional. It's chaotic before it becomes clear. But if you keep showing up in your truth, keep trusting your energy, keep honoring your boundaries, the right ones will find you. The ones who are ready. The ones who see you. The ones who don't just want your light, but bring their own. Until then, keep shining, keep triggering, keep healing, because you're not too intense. You're not too soft. You're just awake in a world that's still rubbing its eyes. Becoming the alchemist, transmuting your sensitivity into power. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey where you stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and instead begin to ask, "What can I create with this?" That moment is the turning point. It's when the burden of your sensitivity becomes the birthplace of your strength. It's when you realize that you were never meant to be at the mercy of your emotions, your empathy, or your energetic depth. You were meant to master them. This is what it means to become an alchemist. Not someone who avoids pain or escapes emotion, but someone who learns how to transmute it. Someone who turns heaviness into insight, compassion into clarity, and wounds into wisdom. You see, your sensitivity was never the problem. The problem was that you were handed no tools for it. No one showed you how to contain your energy, how to ground your empathy, how to protect your inner world while still remaining open. And so you absorbed everything. You mistook chaos for connection. You confused emotional labor with love. You carried other people's trauma like it was your responsibility to heal it. But now you see the truth. Your gift doesn't lie in being overwhelmed by what you feel. It lies in your ability to channel what you feel into something higher, into art, into service, into prayer, into presence, into power. The real alchemy happens when you stop running from your extremes and start using them. When your anger becomes fuel for righteous change. When your sadness becomes the depth from which you understand others. When your joy becomes so contagious it raises the frequency of every room you enter. This is not about emotional perfection. It's about emotional integration. It's about learning how to sit with your own shadows until they no longer scare you, and then walking into the world with the kind of presence that reminds others they can do the same. Power, real power, isn't loud. It doesn't come from domination or control. It comes from knowing yourself so deeply that nothing outside of you can define you. It comes from feeling your emotions fully, but never letting them dictate your identity. It comes from being so in tune with your energy that when someone tries to project their pain onto you, you recognize it immediately and refuse to absorb it. That's what you've been moving toward this whole time. Not just survival, not just healing, but sovereignty. Emotional, spiritual, energetic sovereignty. The ability to stand as a whole being in a fragmented world. And here's the secret most never discover. Once you learn to alchemize your own pain, your presence becomes healing for others without effort. You don't have to try to fix people. You don't have to offer advice or carry their weight or sacrifice your peace. You just being is enough, because your energy speaks louder than your words. Your alignment becomes a frequency that others feel in their bones. And the more you live in that alignment, the more your so-called weaknesses become your greatest strengths. The parts of you that once made you feel broken become the very qualities that make you magnetic, powerful, untouchable. So maybe you've always been too intense or too soft. That was never a mistake. That was training. It was the universe preparing you to become the kind of person who feels everything and still chooses love, who sees everything and still chooses presence, who knows everything could fall apart and still shows up anyway. That's alchemy. That's mastery. That's what it means to walk as a breaker, a healer, a chosen one in a world that desperately needs more souls who know how to turn pain into peace and sensitivity into strength. And now it's your turn, not to explain yourself, not to shrink, but to rise, with your full heart, with your unfiltered depth, with your sacred fire, because the world doesn't need you to be more palatable. It needs you to be fully you finally, unapologetically and powerfully. The alchemist, the mirror, the one who walked through the fire and came out glowing. You were never too much. You were just the exact amount of light this world forgot it needed.